What would you do if you walked into a place you built with your own two hands, only to discover it harbored secrets that could shatter everything you believed in? Today, we step into the quiet storm that is Maggie Lawson's world, a thriving entrepreneur whose name graced the signage of 20 restaurants across the South. But behind the polished wood and comforting scent of home-cooked meals, something was festering. Something she never imagined she'd find. On a sweltering Texas afternoon, Maggie eased her rental car into the familiar yet distant parking lot of Southern Harvest, one of her first locations, tucked into the outskirts of Houston. The golden sun baked the asphalt in waves of heat, mirroring the tension twisting in her chest. To any passerby, the restaurant looked inviting, a humble haven promising fried chicken, buttered biscuits, and sweet tea. But Maggie sat frozen behind the wheel, her fingers gripping the leather steering wheel with quiet apprehension. It had been over 2 years since she'd visited this branch, too long, and trust she'd come to learn was fragile currency in the restaurant business. She took a breath and stepped out, adjusting her blouse, wiping invisible creases as though trying to shake off her anxiety. She needed to blend in. No one inside knew who she really was, and that was the point. The truth didn't reveal itself to owners, it unfolded only for strangers. As she pushed open the door, a blast of chilled air wrapped around her, bringing a momentary reprieve from the heat. The familiar aroma of fried catfish and baked cornbread drifted through the air, but the feeling of comfort that usually came with it was absent. The room was quieter than it should have been. A restaurant like this should echo with laughter, the clinking of plates, the hum of casual conversation, but Maggie only heard murmurs. She scanned the room. A few families scattered around, a pair of truckers at the counter, heads bent over steaming plates. Yet what drew her attention was the staff. Young servers moved like they were navigating a minefield, carefully, deliberately, avoiding eye contact as if they feared being seen. Behind the register stood a woman in her mid-30s, her eyes hollowed by fatigue, her expression locked in emotionless routine as she punched keys with robotic precision. Maggie's gaze locked on a young server, maybe 19, carefully balancing a tray of sodas. He walked with the practiced rhythm of someone who'd done this 1,000 times, but as he passed by the kitchen doors, he paused, just for a second. His eyes flicked toward the back, a flicker of fear, before he forced himself forward. That half-second hesitation struck Maggie like a silent alarm. Something was wrong, deeply wrong. She slid into a corner booth, choosing a seat with a clear view of the floor. Moments later, a waitress approached with a stiff smile. "Welcome to Southern Harvest. What can I get started for you?" Her name tag read Vanessa. There was something haunted in her eyes. Weariness, yes, but more than that, caution. Maggie ordered a coffee with a polite, measured tone. She wasn't here to eat. She was here to observe, to listen, to see what the numbers and spreadsheets never showed. As Vanessa walked away, Maggie leaned back, tapping her fingers against the tabletop, watching the subtle choreography of strained movements and nervous glances. She'd run enough restaurants to know when something was off, and everything here was off. Her coffee arrived, and Maggie let the warmth of the mug seep into her palms, grounding herself as she studied Vanessa. The woman moved quickly, efficiently, never missing a step. Yet every time she passed the kitchen, her shoulders tightened, her eyes darting toward the door. Anticipation. Dread. Then came the moment that changed everything. A customer at a nearby table, middle-aged, sun-weathered, waved Vanessa over, irritation etched into his features. Maggie watched as Vanessa rushed to his side, apologizing before he even spoke. "This is cold," he muttered, pointing to his mashed potatoes. Vanessa began to respond. "I'm so sorry, sir. I can get you a fresh," when a voice cut through the room like a whip crack. "Vanessa." A man stepped out from the back, tall, commanding, his polished shirt and smug expression immediately marking him as someone who thought he ran the show. Derek Simmons, the manager. He didn't look at the customer, didn't ask questions. He went straight to Vanessa, arms crossed, voice low but sharp enough to cut. "How many times do I have to tell you to check the plates before they go out?" Vanessa flinched, the apology dying on her lips. I did check, but—" "No excuses," Derek snapped. "I don't care if it's the kitchen's fault. You served it. You fix it." Even the customer recoiled, startled by the harshness. Look, it's not a big deal," he muttered, clearly uncomfortable. "I just wanted it warmer." But the damage was already done. Maggie felt her stomach knot. Not just from anger, but from the sharp, painful sting of betrayal. This wasn't just poor management. This was something uglier, something systemic. And if it was happening here, how many other places in her empire were built on that same silent suffering? The decision loomed in her mind like a fork in the road: remain the unseen observer, or risk everything to fight for the people she'd unknowingly failed. She wasn't sure what came next, but she knew this much: she couldn't look away anymore. Derek turned to the customer with a manufactured smile that never quite reached his eyes. "Of course, sir. We'll get that replaced immediately." Then, without even glancing back at Vanessa, he jerked his chin toward the kitchen, dismissing her like she was just another malfunctioning cog in his machine. She swallowed hard, gave a brief nod, and vanished through the swinging doors. Maggie felt her jaw tighten, her breath steady but simmering beneath the surface. This wasn't a manager correcting a mistake. This was a performance of control, a calculated display of dominance meant to belittle and intimidate. Derek wasn't just leading with criticism, he was using it to instill fear, asserting power like a tyrant masking as a professional. She leaned back and watched him adjust his sleeves with the self-satisfaction of a man who knew he ruled his domain without question. His eyes scanned the restaurant floor like a hawk eyeing prey, and Maggie noted how the staff responded. Spines straightened, movements slowed, smiles became tighter. Every employee's body language subtly shifted when he was near, a silent collective recoil. She'd seen this pattern before. Managers like Derek ran restaurants not through respect but through fear, through a toxic blend of micromanagement and emotional manipulation. She kept watching, and soon enough, the deeper currents emerged. Derek barely acknowledged certain staff members, the younger servers, the busboys. Others, the ones who seemed more relaxed around him, received occasional nods or fleeting smiles. It was clear there were favorites and there were expendables. Her eyes drifted toward the scheduling sheet pinned near the kitchen. A quick scan told her everything she needed to know. Names like Vanessa's were scattered across the week, one shift here, one shift there, an impossible schedule for anyone trying to maintain stability. Meanwhile, other names, ones unfamiliar to her, had prime blocks of hours clustered neatly together. This wasn't random. It was control. Vanessa returned from the kitchen with a fresh plate, her posture rigid, a mask of composure on her face, but Maggie could see through it. She recognized the quiet resignation in Vanessa's eyes, the learned helplessness of someone who had long ago stopped believing that standing up for herself would lead to anything but punishment. Maggie tapped her fingers on the table, thoughts spiraling. How many had left because of Derek? How long had this gone unchecked? Her musings were interrupted by a soft voice beside her. "I've been coming here for years," an older man murmured, his voice tinged with disappointment. "It wasn't always like this. Something's different now. Folks don't stay long. That girl," he nodded toward Vanessa, "I don't think she'll last either." Maggie watched Vanessa force a smile for another customer. The unease she had felt earlier was now a quiet, anchored certainty. This wasn't an isolated bad day. This was a culture of fear that had taken root and thrived in the shadows of her business. She gripped the edge of the table, her eyes locked on her coffee cup, the liquid swirling like the storm inside her. She replayed the confrontation between Derek and Vanessa, dissecting every inflection, every flinch. Her instincts screamed at her to act, but years of experience reminded her to gather facts first. Emotions could mislead, but the truth never did. Still, one question haunted her. How had a man like Derek ended up in charge? Was this an isolated case, or the symptom of something deeper festering in her company? She hadn't forgotten what it meant to serve. The sore feet, the passive-aggressive customers, the managers who treated you like you were lucky just to have a name tag. And now, watching Vanessa's humility turned to submission. Maggie was forced to confront whether she had allowed the very culture she'd once vowed to destroy to flourish under her name. Her eyes swept the room again. It wasn't just Vanessa. The entire staff moved like they were under surveillance. Conversations hushed, smiles strained. Fear had a shape, and it had taken hold here. She needed to see more. She raised a hand, signaling Vanessa. The young woman approached quickly, notebook in hand, but her posture cautious. "Would you mind changing my order?" Maggie asked with a calm, pleasant tone. "I think I'd rather try the grilled catfish instead of the fried chicken." Vanessa hesitated. Her eyes flicked toward the order slips near the counter. I can check, but we're not really supposed to change orders once they're in." "Is that a strict policy?" Maggie asked, feigning polite curiosity. Vanessa's pen tightened in her grip. "It's just how things are run here," she said, her voice even but strained. Before Maggie could say more, a familiar voice sliced through the air. "Vanessa." Derek was on them in moments. His posture was relaxed, but the air shifted, a storm, cloaked in civility. "What's going on here?" he asked, eyes scanning Maggie before landing on Vanessa. "She was asking about changing her order," Vanessa replied, her voice barely above a whisper. Derek exhaled sharply. "How many times do I have to say it? If an order is in, it stays in. You don't make exceptions, and you sure as hell don't waste time debating it." Maggie watched Vanessa recoil inwardly. Derek's eyes narrowed. "Since you're feeling brave today, maybe I'll just cut your next shift." Vanessa paled. "What? No, Maybe that'll remind you to follow the damn rules," Derek finished, his tone smooth, his threat sharpened to precision. I said." He turned to Maggie then, flashing a tight, rehearsed grin. "I hope she hasn't inconvenienced you." Maggie met his gaze, unreadable. "Not at all." Derek lingered as if sizing her up, then turned and strode back toward the kitchen. Vanessa stood still, trembling slightly. "I'm sorry about that," she said, voice barely audible. Maggie shook her head. "You didn't do anything wrong." But Vanessa didn't seem convinced. She nodded quickly and walked away. Maggie's hands curled into fists beneath the table. This was no longer about poor leadership. It was exploitation. She needed evidence. A new cup of coffee arrived at her table, and she looked up to see an older woman with cropped silver hair and eyes that had seen too much. Her name tag read, "Linda." "You're not from around here, are you?" Linda's voice was low, measured. Maggie tilted her head. "What makes you say that?" Linda smiled faintly. "Because you're paying attention." Silence fell between them before Linda slid into the booth across from her. "This place used to be good," she said quietly. "People stayed for years, but ever since he got promoted, they don't last. He makes sure of that." Maggie frowned. "No one's reported him?" Linda laughed bitterly. "To who? Corporate? They don't see what goes on day to day, and as long as profits are up, they don't want to. Derek knows how to play the game." She gave Maggie a knowing look. "But something tells me you might." Before Maggie could respond, Linda slid a folded paper across the table and stood, disappearing into the crowd. Maggie unfolded it. A shift schedule. At first glance, nothing unusual. But then she noticed the pattern. Names like Vanessa's were all over the place. Hardly enough hours to survive. Other names, block shifts, prime hours. This wasn't incompetence, it was by design. She stared at the paper, her jaw set. Then she stood. It was time to go deeper. Maggie walked toward the back, past the restrooms, past a flimsy plastic divider that led to the kitchen. She didn't belong back there, not officially, but she needed to see it for herself. The moment she stepped in, the atmosphere changed. The kitchen was thick with heat and urgency. Steam rose, grease sizzled, the air was heavy, humid. No one noticed her at first. A young man chopped vegetables furiously. Another flipped burgers, sweat glistening down his neck. Their movements were quick, tense, eyes locked on their tasks. Then a voice whispered behind her, "We don't get breaks, you know." She turned slightly, spotting a young dishwasher, probably early 20s, dark curls tucked under a cap. His hands worked beneath the soapy water. "No breaks?" she asked, keeping her tone light. He gave her a tired smile. "Not unless you count sprinting to the bathroom before Derek notices. We used to get 15 minutes. He called it dead time and cut it." Maggie said nothing, but inside she felt the storm building. This was more than mismanagement. It was abuse, and it had her name on it. But not for much longer. Maggie's frown deepened. She had never authorized policy changes like this. "And what happens if you complain?" she asked quietly. The young man gave a dry, bitter laugh. "They cut your hours. Or worse, fire you over something stupid. One guy got written up for attitude just for asking for a break during a double shift." Her jaw clenched. Before she could respond, another voice, this time a woman's, muttered from the prep station without turning around. "Don't talk too much, you'll get in trouble." Maggie was about to ask more when the sharp sound of footsteps approaching made her heart lurch. She turned just in time to see Derek stride into the kitchen. His eyes scanned the room like searchlights, landing squarely on her. His expression stiffened. "Ma'am, customers aren't allowed back here." Maggie met his gaze, her voice steady. "I was just looking around. I like to see where my food is coming from." Derek's mouth twisted into a mockery of a smile, void of anything genuine. "Well, this isn't a tour. We have policies. For safety reasons, guests need to remain in the dining area." She tilted her head slightly, feigning curiosity. "I understand, though it's a bit concerning there's no proper ventilation in here." Her eyes flicked to the staff and then back to Derek. "And no breaks?" Derek's face darkened. "I'm not sure where you heard that, but we follow all labor guidelines here." Maggie didn't respond. She didn't have to. Years in this business had sharpened her instincts, and they told her he was lying. His tone sharpened. "Are you looking for something, ma'am?" Maggie smiled coolly. "Just my dinner." They held each other's stare for a tense moment before Derek stepped aside. "Then I'd suggest heading back to your table." She turned without a word, walking away as she felt his gaze stab into her back. He was rattled, and that meant she was getting close. Back in the dining area, Maggie had barely returned to her booth when a small commotion erupted near the front entrance. An elderly man, frail and unsteady, clutched the corner of a table for support, his face contorted in pain as he slowly lowered himself into a chair. A sharp voice rang out. "Oh my God, are you okay?" One of the young servers rushed to him, but it was Vanessa who knelt at his side first. "What happened?" "I slipped," the man winced, pressing a hand to his hip. "Damn floor's slick as ice." Maggie's eyes darted to the entranceway. The tiles shimmered slightly. Someone had mopped recently, but no caution signs had been placed. A lawsuit waiting to happen. Vanessa looked up, her concern plain. "We need to get you checked out." But before anything more could be said, Derek's voice thundered through the air. "What the hell is going on over here?" He marched toward the group, and Maggie sat still, watching closely. The old man grimaced. "Slipped on the floor. Think my hip took the worst of it." Derek barely spared him a glance. His focus was on Vanessa. "Why are you on the floor? You're supposed to be working." She blinked. "He's hurt," Derek scoffed. "He's fine. He's sitting, isn't he?" Another waitress hesitated. "Should we call someone? A manager?" Derek snapped. "I am the manager." Maggie felt the tension build in her chest. Vanessa stood slowly, her hands clenched. "At least let me get him some ice." Derek's jaw tightened. "Get back to work, Vanessa. Now." Her mouth opened slightly, but no words came. She stopped herself. Again. That was enough. Maggie set her coffee down and stood, her movements calm, deliberate. "I think you should let her help him," she said, her voice composed but firm. Derek turned to her, irritation flaring. "Ma'am, with all due respect, this doesn't concern you." Maggie met his gaze evenly. "Oh, I think it does." The challenge hung in the air like a crack of thunder. Derek for the first time hesitated. He wasn't just another customer, and he knew it. For a long moment, they stared at each other. But instead of exploding, Derek did something that surprised her. He smirked. "As I said, ma'am," he said condescendingly, "this doesn't concern you." Then he turned and walked away. Maggie slowly exhaled, her jaw tight. Vanessa hesitated, then wordlessly returned to her duties, her face a mask. The older man sat slumped, murmuring to himself, still unattended. This wasn't about management anymore. It was about negligence, abuse, corruption. She had a choice. Walk out. File a report. Let the slow wheels of corporate bureaucracy turn. Maybe something would change. Or acting meant revealing who she was. It wasn't what she'd planned. She had wanted more time, more evidence, but time had run out. Then, as if fate had a script of its own, Linda reappeared. She didn't speak, she just slid a folded sheet of paper across the table. Maggie opened it. It was a payroll document. Her eyes scanned the columns, and a cold pit formed in her stomach. Deductions without explanations. Staff who'd worked full weeks earning less than others with fewer hours. And worse, names listed who no longer worked there, still drawing salaries. Brought. She looked up. Linda's face was calm, but her voice was edged with quiet urgency. "I know you're not just a customer," she whispered. "Been here too long not to see it." Maggie didn't answer. Linda leaned in. "If you can do something, please. We need help." The words struck Maggie deep. This was bigger than abuse. Derek wasn't just intimidating staff. He was stealing from them, from the business, from her. She pulled out her phone, her voice low. "Hey, Rick, I need you to check something for me." Rick was a longtime friend, a labor attorney. If anyone could help her uncover the full legal mess Derek had created, it was him. "Tell me everything," he said. She recounted the payroll discrepancies, the manipulated shifts, the cut breaks, the fabricated hours. Rick paused, then let out a slow whistle. "That's not just shady, Maggie. That's illegal. Multiple violations of state and federal labor laws. If this holds up, he's looking at serious consequences, fines, audits, maybe even a class action lawsuit." Maggie looked out across her restaurant. Her name still hung above the door. But what it stood for, that was about to change. Maggie exhaled sharply. Rick's words confirmed what she had already suspected. "What's the fastest way to get him out?" she asked. Rick was quiet for a moment. "You'll need solid evidence. witnesses willing to speak up. A formal complaint from corporate is the first step, but if you want immediate action, you'd have to go higher. Make it public, make a scene, force his hand before he can cover his tracks. Going public wasn't what Maggie had planned, but letting Derek continue was no longer an option. She had built this business from scratch, with integrity and heart. Letting someone like him tarnish that legacy was out of the question. Her mind was made up. She thanked Rick, ended the call, and slipped the payroll document into her bag. Then she straightened her spine, a sense of clarity anchoring her as she signaled Linda over. "I need one more favor," Maggie said. Linda leaned in, her face open. "Anything. I need everyone in this restaurant to see what's about to happen." Linda nodded once, then disappeared, whispering discreetly to the staff. The air shifted. Conversations dulled. Employees gravitated toward the edges of the dining area. Even the customers sensed something was coming. Forks hovered mid-bite. Silence spread like wildfire. Maggie sat still, fingers resting on the rim of her coffee cup, her eyes locked on Derek as he strutted across the floor, oblivious to the eyes watching him. She raised her hand. "Derek, could you come here for a moment?" He turned at the sound of his name, eyes narrowing. Suspicion flickered across his face, but he walked over with forced politeness. "Yes, ma'am. Do you believe your employees are treated fairly?" He let out a short laugh. "Fair? Look, lady, this is a business, not a charity." Maggie nodded slowly. "It just seems like they're more afraid of you than anything else." That struck a nerve. Derek straightened. "I run a tight ship. That's what keeps places like this profitable. And if someone were to disagree with you, if an employee felt mistreated," he scoffed, "then they can leave." Around the room, Maggie saw the subtle reactions. Vanessa's jaw tightening, a young waiter's sharp inhale. "And if they stay?" "Then they learn to deal with it." Maggie's expression didn't change, but inside she felt the moment crystallizing. "So if an employee, let's say Vanessa, were to speak up, you'd fire her?" Derek snorted. "Vanessa? She's too sensitive, always whining. Maybe she should find a job more her speed." The room went still. A man near the back muttered, "Jesus." Another customer whispered, "Did he really just say that?" Derek didn't notice. He was too focused on Maggie. And then she stood. "That's very interesting," she said, her voice cutting through the silence, "because as of this moment, you won't be deciding anything here ever again." Derek blinked. "What?" Maggie pulled out her phone, dialed and lifted it to her ear. "This is Margaret Lawson. I need immediate termination for Derek Simmons, Southern Harvest, Houston location, labor violations, wage theft, inappropriate conduct, effective immediately." The color drained from Derek's face. "What the hell are you talking about?" Maggie ignored him. "Send HR to oversee the transition." Derek's voice cracked. "You can't just..." Maggie lowered her phone. "Actually, I can." He stared at her, his mind scrambling. "You own this place?" She nodded once. A thick silence settled. Eyes darted between Derek and Maggie. Vanessa's eyes shimmered, her hand covering her mouth. Derek shook his head, defiance slipping through desperation. "You're making a mistake. You don't know how hard I've worked." "You didn't work," Maggie snapped. "You exploited. You bullied, and you stole. You're lucky I'm only firing you." Words caught in Derek's throat. And then, the final crack appeared in his armor. Maggie turned to her staff. "From now on, this restaurant will run the way it was meant to, fairly, and with the right people in charge." Vanessa exhaled shakily. A sense of release spread among the team like fresh air. Maggie turned back. "Leave." Derek stood motionless for a beat, as if waiting for someone to intervene. No one did. He gave a bitter chuckle. "You think you're funny?" he sneered. "You can't fire me like this. Who do you think you are?" Maggie opened her phone, fingers tapping swiftly. Derek's voice rose. "What are you doing?" "Sending the official notice. Corporate HR will review your actions." He scoffed. "You're bluffing. I made this place profitable." Maggie raised her gaze, steady and cold. "At what cost? You forgot the most important part of leadership, trust. This restaurant isn't yours. It belongs to the people who make it work every day." A trembling voice rose from behind the register. "He steals our tips." A young waiter, barely 20, stepped forward. "We never see most of them. He says customers don't tip, but that's not true." Derek spun toward him. "Watch yourself, Jason." But the warning lacked fire now. Another voice, firm. "He alters our timesheets too." Linda stood behind Jason, arms folded. "We knew what he was doing, but we needed the jobs." Maggie nodded, acknowledging their courage. Derek's skin paled as his gaze darted, searching for someone, anyone, to back him up. No one did. Maggie held up her phone. "HR and legal are already on their way. They'll audit everything." Derek backed up, his voice cracking. "This is insane. I gave years to this place." "No, Derek," Maggie replied, calm and final. "You took years from these people. Their time, their money, their dignity. This place thrived despite you." Linda stepped forward. "He's been falsifying hours, pocketing the difference. We stayed silent too long." The tension peaked. Derek looked for allies. None came. Employees stood united. Even customers watched, silent, transfixed. Maggie stepped closer, her voice low and deliberate. "Your actions don't reflect this company. You don't represent me. You're finished." Derek faltered, lips parting as if to protest, but then, as if all the air had left him, he simply deflated. From the entrance, 2 company security members appeared. Maggie had summoned them quietly minutes before. Their arrival signaled the end. Derek straightened his tie in a last show of defiance. "You'll regret this," he muttered. "Without me, this place won't last a month." Maggie didn't flinch. "Then I guess we'll finally see what this place can become, without fear running it." And with that, Derek Simmons, the man who once ruled through intimidation, was escorted out. And for the first time in a long time, Southern Harvest felt like a place worth walking into again. He walked toward the exit, the weight of silence pressing down with every step. As the front door clicked shut behind him, it was as though the spell had broken. For a beat, no one moved. Then, tentatively, Vanessa clapped, softly at first, hesitant, uncertain. Another employee joined in, then another, and soon the entire room filled with applause. It wasn't just for Maggie. It was a release. Months, maybe years of tension and fear pouring out in a wave of catharsis. Vanessa wiped at her tears, overwhelmed by the sudden release of emotion. Maggie turned and watched through the window as Derek stood beside his car, his face a mixture of rage and disbelief. He slammed his hand on the roof, a muffled thud lost to the glass. It wasn't pity Maggie felt, but sorrow that someone could lose their way so completely. When she turned back to the restaurant, everything had shifted. Smiles had returned, real ones. The warmth that once defined Southern Harvest was beginning to return, like sunlight after a storm. Maggie knew this wasn't the end. There were still deeper issues to address, policies to revise, protections to put in place. But today was the first step, a monumental one, toward reclaiming dignity, fairness, and community. She exhaled deeply, exhaustion and pride mingling inside her. Standing up to Derek had been risky, uncomfortable, and necessary. She would do it again without hesitation. As the applause quieted, Vanessa approached her, voice trembling with gratitude. "I don't know who you really are," she whispered, "but thank you. You have no idea what this means to us." Maggie offered a quiet smile and a nod. They would all learn the truth in time. But this moment wasn't about her. It was about them. She scanned the room, taking in the faces of her staff, young and old, worn and hopeful. And in that stillness, she realized something profound. This wasn't just about one manager, one store, or even one policy. It was about the people who held businesses like this together, with hard work and silent endurance. And they deserved better. This is exciting. In that moment of clarity, Maggie knew this was just the beginning. It wasn't enough to remove a bad seed. She had to change the soil itself. She looked over at Vanessa, still standing near the register, eyes wide with disbelief. Maggie stepped closer. "Vanessa," she said, her voice firm but warm, "if I asked you to take over as manager here, would you accept?" Vanessa blinked rapidly, emotions swelling in her throat. I don't know if I can." "Are you sure?" Before Maggie could answer, Linda stepped in, resting a hand on Vanessa's shoulder. "If anyone deserves this chance, it's you." Tears spilled down Vanessa's cheeks as she looked from Linda to Maggie. Maggie nodded. "You've earned this. Trust yourself the way we all trust you." The restaurant held its breath. And Vanessa nodded. "Yes, I'll do it. I'll do my best." Applause roared through the room again, louder this time, rich with joy. Employees embraced Vanessa, laughter and cheers swirling through the air. Maggie watched, her heart full. When the room quieted, she stepped forward. "There's a woman who's strong." "Everyone," she said clearly, "this isn't just a new manager. It's a new beginning. Starting today, wages will be increased, not as charity, but as fairness. Shifts won't be used as punishment. And if something is wrong, there will be a private channel directly to my office. No more fear." Murmurs of surprise rippled through the staff. Heads nodded. Relief and hope lit up their faces. "I built this business from nothing," Maggie continued. "I started just like many of you. Long hours, tired feet, small paychecks. I promised myself I'd never forget. And I haven't. This restaurant, and every restaurant I own, will be a place of fairness, respect, and dignity." Linda gave her a subtle nod. A quiet signal of trust passed from one leader to another. Maggie stayed a little longer, watching the space transform. Vanessa already began planning the new shift schedule with Linda. Shoulders back, voice steady, pride blossomed in Maggie's chest. Change wasn't easy, but the hardest part was done. The silence had been broken. She gathered her purse, slipping outside without ceremony. The air was warm and reassuring. Through the window she saw joy and connection flourishing once again. She put on a white dress, and Beacon Swag became an efficient aide, casting impossible shadows. This had always been her dream, not just food, but family, not just profits, but people. Maggie paused by her car, looking back one last time at the glowing lights. This had never been about Derek, or even Vanessa. It was about reclaiming the soul of something that nearly slipped away. She drove into the setting sun, the road unfolding before her. She didn't just feel victorious. She felt transformed. The battle at Southern Harvest was just the beginning. Maggie knew that now. There were other restaurants, other stories waiting in the shadows. Once Derek disappeared, change came fast. Laughter returned. Fear evaporated. Vanessa eased into her role, supported by a staff who had always believed in her. And Derek? He vanished. Blacklisted, disgraced, forgotten. Maggie, meanwhile, took action. She scoured every location, formed inspection teams, and rebuilt her company from within. It was hard, it was expensive, but it was. A month later, she returned to Southern Harvest openly. This time, Vanessa greeted her with pride. "It's good to see you again," she said, confident, calm, strong. Maggie sat near the window, heart swelling with warmth. "How are things?" Vanessa's smile said it all. "Better. People aren't afraid anymore. Customers notice, too." The space was alive again. Clattering dishes, fresh biscuits, shared stories. Linda stopped by. "You changed a lot around here." Maggie smiled. "You did." "I just opened the door." Linda's eyes sparkled. "Maybe, but it always starts at the top." Maggie nodded quietly. Leadership mattered. Fairness mattered. She had always known. But now she lived it. As she left Southern Harvest once more, she didn't just feel proud. She felt driven. This was a movement, a mission. Derek had shown her how fragile trust could be. Now it was her job to protect it. Because at the heart of business wasn't just numbers or margins. It was people, and people deserve more. Sometimes, all it takes is one voice, one act of courage, one woman named Margaret Lawson. Let her story be a reminder. True leadership isn't built on control, it's built on compassion. If this story touched you, stay with us. More stories like this are waiting. We'll see you next time.